Hey guys, tonight we walk together into a medieval morning that smells faintly of damp straw, wood smoke, and something you can't quite place, like old metal left in the rain. You open your eyes in a narrow bed, wrapped in rough wool, listening to a town that sounds off. Fewer carts creak past, fewer voices argue about bread prices. Somewhere a bell tolls earlier than usual, and not for church. You don't know it yet, but you are standing at the edge of the worst pandemic Europe has ever known. And yes, this is one of those moments where you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere cozy, or somewhere wide awake at 3 in the morning, feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step outside into air that feels heavier than it did yesterday. The street is still there, crooked timber houses leaning toward each other like tired old friends, but something has shifted. A door is marked with a simple sign, maybe chalk, maybe paint, warning others to keep away. You don't need to read it. Everyone already knows. Someone down that lane took ill in the night. Historians generally agree that by the late 1340s, the disease we now call the Black Death had begun tearing through Europe, arriving via trade routes that connected the Mediterranean to the rest of the continent. You, of course, have no idea about bacteria or fleas or global commerce. All you know is that people are coughing, swelling, and disappearing from daily life at an alarming rate. The market stalls are fewer. The baker's wife isn't there this morning. You tell yourself she's just resting. You tell yourself a lot of things lately. You walk carefully because even the ground feels suspicious now. Every shadow looks like danger. There's a strange tension in the way people avoid eye contact, the way conversations end abruptly when someone starts clearing their throat. You notice how often hands are washed in cold water, how often prayers are whispered under breath. The town smells sharper too. Vinegar, herbs, smoke, people trying anything to clean the air. One mainstream belief of the time is that bad air, or miasma, carries disease, so everyone is very concerned about smells. This is medieval Febreze, and it's not working. A quirky tidbit you pick up, almost in passing, is that some folks carry small bouquets of flowers or scented pouches, believing pleasant smells might protect them. It's charming in a tragic way. You consider getting one yourself until you realize flowers cost money, and money suddenly feels like something you should save in case bread gets even more expensive. Survival budgeting, medieval edition. You head toward the church, not because you're especially devout, but because churches are information hubs. If something is wrong, you'll hear it there. The priest looks older than he did last week. Maybe he always looked like that. It's hard to tell now that stress lines are appearing on everyone's faces. He speaks of repentance, of tests sent by God, of patience. Some nod, others stare at the floor. Historians still argue whether religious explanations comforted people more than they frightened them. But standing here, you feel a mix of both. Comforted that there might be a reason, frightened that the reason might be you. As you leave, a cart rolls past carrying covered shapes. Not bodies, you tell yourself, just goods. Very human-shaped goods. You avert your eyes, suddenly fascinated by a crack in the stone wall. Here comes one of those moments where you realize denial is doing a lot of heavy lifting in your emotional life. You make a mental note to deny harder tomorrow. Back at home, daily life insists on continuing. You sweep, you eat, you work if there's work to be had. Before the plague, your days were predictable in a way that felt boring. Now, boring sounds like a luxury vacation. The Black Death doesn't arrive with trumpets or announcements. It seeps in quietly, stealing normality before it ever touches your body. That's one of the most horrible parts of surviving it. watching the world decay in slow motion, while yours still technically alive. There's debate even now about what people noticed first: the sudden deaths, the strange swellings, or the collapse of social routines. Some scholars argue that fear spread faster than illness, changing behavior before symptoms appeared. You feel that fear working its way into your bones. You hesitate before touching door handles. You flinch when someone sneezes. Congratulations, you've invented social distancing, except without Netflix. As evening approaches, bells ring again. Too often, you count them without meaning to. 1, 2, 3. You stop counting at 5 because your chest feels tight and you don't want to think about what the number might be by morning. You eat a thin stew, tasting mostly water, and wonder if hunger or sickness will get you first. Light joke number 1, because we need one. Medieval life really knows how to keep its threats varied. When night falls, the town goes quiet in a way that feels unnatural. No laughter, no songs, just the occasional cough echoing through walls that suddenly seem too thin. You lie back down, listening, waiting. You think about how yesterday felt normal. You think about how quickly normal slipped away. Surviving the Black Plague, you're beginning to realize, isn't just about avoiding death. It's about living inside constant uncertainty, where every morning feels like borrowed time. As sleep creeps in, you make a small promise to yourself. If you wake up tomorrow, you'll be grateful. You'll be careful. You'll try not to think too far ahead. That's how you survive the first stage. Not with strength or knowledge, but with cautious hope and a lot of unanswered questions. You wake again, which already feels like a small victory, though it's the kind you don't brag about. The morning light sneaks in through a gap in the shutters, dusty and pale, and you lie still for a moment, listening. The town hasn't gone silent overnight, which you take as a good sign, even if your standards for good are slipping fast. You sit up slowly, as if sudden movements might offend whatever unseen force is stalking your streets. By now, the sickness has a name of sorts, though everyone seems to call it something different. Some say it's a curse. Others insist it's poisoned air drifting in from faraway lands. A few whisper that foreigners brought it, because apparently humanity has always found comfort in blaming travelers. You don't know what to believe. You just know that people who were healthy a few days ago are now missing from their homes, and explanations are piling up faster than solutions. One mainstream historical fact is that medieval medicine operates on the theory of the 4 humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, and illness is believed to come from imbalance. So naturally, the cures focus on restoring balance, which sounds sensible until you realize no one agrees on what balanced looks like. You overhear someone explaining that the plague is caused by too much black bile, while another insists it's an excess of blood. You quietly wonder if the disease itself is laughing at all of you. Doctors, when you see them, look like walking spice racks. Long robes, masks stuffed with herbs. They smell intensely of cloves and rosemary, which is impressive because you can still smell fear underneath. These physicians are trying, genuinely, but they're guessing. Historians still argue whether medieval doctors helped at all or simply made patients more comfortable as they declined. From your perspective, the comfort is questionable, but you appreciate the effort. A particularly quirky tidbit makes the rounds. Some learned men suggest the planets are to blame. A rare alignment of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars, they say, corrupted the air itself. You glance up at the sky one night, searching for answers among the stars, and conclude that they look exactly the same as they always have. Not very helpful stars. Do better. Information spreads slowly, but misinformation spreads faster. Someone swears that ringing bells drives the sickness away. Another insists loud noises anger it. You're not sure which to believe, so the town alternates between noisy panic and tense silence.
There's a lot of experimentation happening, none of it controlled. If this were a science lab, it would be shut down immediately.
You try to piece together patterns. Does it strike the old first, the poor, the sinful? Unfortunately, it seems to strike everyone, which is deeply unfair and not how most moral systems prefer disasters to work. Historians still debate whether certain groups were more vulnerable due to nutrition or living conditions, but standing here, you mostly see randomness wearing a very cruel disguise.
Conversations become strange. People speak in half sentences, afraid to finish a thought lest it become real. You notice how often someone starts with, "I heard that," followed by something increasingly unbelievable. Drinking crushed emeralds, bathing in vinegar, sitting near fires all day. You briefly consider doing all of them at once, just to cover your bases. Then remember you don't own emeralds and firewood isn't free.
Your own body becomes something you monitor obsessively. You check your skin. You pay attention to every ache. Is that soreness from work or something worse? Is that warmth a fever or just nerves? You are suddenly very aware of yourself in a way that is not relaxing at all. Modern mindfulness would tell you to live in the moment. Medieval mindfulness tells you the moment might kill you.
At the edge of town, officials start making announcements. Nothing official sounding, just stern voices declaring what people should and should not do. Don't gather. Don't travel. Don't touch the sick. Also, pray more. There's a lot of don't, and not much here's how to stay safe. Another light joke, because we need one. Public health messaging is really finding its early draft phase here. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether people understood contagion in any meaningful way. Some evidence suggests they noticed proximity mattered. Others argue they chalked up patterns to coincidence or divine will. You personally notice that households with one sick person tend to get quieter quickly. That's enough for you. You start giving neighbors more space, waving from farther away, pretending you've always preferred it this way. As days pass, theories harden into beliefs. Beliefs harden into rules. Rules harden into fear. You realize that surviving this isn't just about avoiding illness. It's about navigating a world where everyone thinks they've found the answer, and none of those answers agree. Choosing wrong could be dangerous. Choosing nothing could be worse. At night, lying awake, you replay the rumors in your head. Air, stars, sin, strangers, none of them feel solid. You wish, briefly, for a clear enemy you could see and avoid. Instead, you have an invisible threat wrapped in confusion. Surviving the Black Plague, you're learning, means living without certainty, guided by guesses and hope. When sleep finally comes, it's shallow and restless. Even dreams seem cautious now, tiptoeing around the truth. Tomorrow, you'll wake and listen again, measuring survival, not in years or months, but in another ordinary morning that somehow still exists.
You catch yourself thinking for just a moment that maybe things aren't as bad today. The sun comes up in a familiar way, light spilling across the floorboards like it always has, and your body doesn't ache any more than usual. That illusion of normalcy is powerful, dangerous even. You cling to it anyway, because humans are excellent at pretending stability still exists if it shows up wearing the right clothes.
You go through your morning routines with extra care, like repeating them might summon the old world back into place. You eat the same simple breakfast. You check your tools. You step outside at the same hour you always have. For a few minutes, it works. The street looks almost ordinary. Almost. A few houses remain closed, shutters tight. You don't linger on that detail. You're very good at not lingering now. Before the sickness, life moved to a steady rhythm shaped by seasons, bells, and obligations. One mainstream historical fact is that medieval communities were tightly structured around work, faith, and local custom. Everyone knew where they belonged and what was expected of them. That predictability made hardship tolerable. Now, predictability is eroding, and with it, your sense of safety. You head toward where your work used to be. Maybe it still is your work. It's hard to tell when jobs vanish quietly, without announcements or goodbyes. A shop is closed. Another is open, but only just. The owner stands inside, counting coins slowly, as if numbers themselves might disappear if not watched closely. You exchange a nod, no handshake. You feel oddly proud of that restraint, like you've mastered some advanced survival skill. There's comfort in doing something with your hands. Sweeping, hammering, stitching, whatever your trade, you focus on the small, repetitive actions. They give your mind a place to rest. Historians still argue whether continuing work helped people cope psychologically or simply delayed the inevitable. From your perspective, it helps. Even if it doesn't save you, it makes the waiting quieter. You notice changes in the soundscape of the town. Fewer animals, fewer children, more wind. Wind moving through empty spaces where voices used to be. You never realized how much noise people make until they stop. Another light joke slides in here. Turns out medieval towns didn't need noise-canceling headphones, they just needed a plague, which is absolutely not a recommended solution. Midday arrives, and with it, hunger. Food is still available, but choices are narrowing. Fresh things are rarer. You eat what you can get, telling yourself it's fine. You're not picky, you're adaptable. You're also quietly worried about whether eating less might make you weaker, more vulnerable. Scholars debate how malnutrition affected plague survival rates, but all you know is that an empty stomach doesn't help your mood. Someone nearby starts coughing. Not violently, just enough to draw attention. The sound freezes the street. People shift away, subtle but unmistakable. The coughing person notices and flushes with embarrassment, then fear. You remember when a cough was just a cough. That was a nice era. Very short in retrospect. You spend part of the afternoon repairing something that doesn't urgently need repair. It feels productive. It feels like control. There's a strange pleasure in fixing small problems when the big one is so overwhelming. This is how you cope. Others drink. Others pray. Others argue loudly about causes and cures. You tighten a bolt and tell yourself that at least this one thing will hold. A quirky tidbit surfaces in conversation. Some towns hire watchers to observe houses with sick occupants, making sure no one leaves. It's a job no one wants, but someone has to do it. You imagine standing outside a door all day, listening to what happens inside, and decide your current work is suddenly much more appealing. As evening approaches, bells ring again. You notice that you started measuring time by them. Morning bells, still alive. Evening bells, still alive. Night bells, maybe tomorrow. This is not a healthy way to experience time, but it's the one you have. There's an ongoing debate among historians about whether people psychologically adjusted to the constant presence of death or lived in continuous shock. You suspect it's both. You feel numb some moments, panicked others. Mostly, you feel tired. Fear is exhausting. Normal life, it turns out, requires a lot of energy to maintain, and you're spending most of yours just staying calm. At home, you sit quietly, listening to the sounds of neighbors moving around. Every footstep is reassuring. Every silence is heavy. You resist the urge to knock on doors just to check. That would be suspicious now. Caring too much can look dangerous. You lie down earlier than usual, not because you're sleepy, but because there's nowhere else to be. In the dark, you think about how quickly routines become anchors. Losing them feels like drifting. So you promise yourself to keep what routines you can, even if they're smaller now. Wake up, eat something, do something useful, go to bed. Surviving the Black Plague, at least at this stage, isn't heroic. It's not dramatic.
It's about stubbornly performing ordinary acts in an extraordinary situation. You don't know how long you can keep this up, but for tonight, you've made it through another day that almost felt normal. And that's enough. You wake with a strange awareness of your own body, as if every part of it is suddenly submitting a report. How warm do you feel? How heavy are your limbs? How fast is your heart beating right now? This kind of self-monitoring would be impressive in another context. Here, it's just exhausting. You lie still for a moment, listening, hoping nothing hurts enough to demand attention. At first, everything seems fine. You stretch carefully. No sharp pains, no dizziness. You allow yourself a cautious breath of relief. Then, later in the morning, it happens. Something small. A tightness in your throat. A dull ache under your arm. You freeze, hand hovering in midair, afraid to touch it and confirm that it's real. This is how fear works now. Quiet, patient, and very persuasive. One mainstream historical fact is that plague symptoms often appeared suddenly after a short incubation period. People could feel well one day and gravely ill the next. You don't know that in scientific terms, but you know it in practice. You've seen neighbors collapse between one bell and the next. So when your body starts whispering that something is off, you listen hard. You spend the day in a strange limbo, half convinced you're imagining it, half certain this is the beginning. Is that swelling new, or did it always feel like that? You press gently, then immediately regret it. You vow not to press again. 5 minutes later, you press again. You are not good at this. Around you, people are watching each other with the same anxious intensity. Every yawn, every wince, every pause in conversation feels loaded. Historians still argue whether people recognized plague symptoms early enough to isolate effectively, or whether denial delayed action. From inside your own head, denial feels less like ignorance and more like self-defense. A neighbor mentions someone who felt unwell for a few days before getting worse. That phrase sticks with you. A few days. You count backward in your mind, measuring every moment you felt even slightly off. Was it yesterday? Last night? Or is this just hunger and worry teaming up to mess with you? Light joke number 1 for this section. Congratulations, you've discovered anxiety, medieval edition. By afternoon, the ache hasn't disappeared, but it hasn't grown either. This ambiguity is somehow worse. You would almost prefer something decisive. At least then you'd know what to do. Instead, you hover between normal and not normal, trapped in uncertainty. You try to work, but your focus drifts back to your body every few minutes, like a bad habit you can't break. You remember hearing about early signs, fever, fatigue, swellings. Some say blackened spots appear. Others say the cough comes first. The problem is that none of this is consistent. Plague doesn't follow a script, and historians still debate how many forms of the disease were circulating at once. You wish it would pick one. Consistency would be nice. A quirky tidbit circulates through town. Some people believe looking at sick individuals can infect you through the eyes. As a result, folks avert their gaze dramatically, like avoiding spoilers for a very unpleasant ending. You adopt the habit halfway, mostly because eye contact has become uncomfortable anyway. As evening falls, you feel warmer than usual. Not feverish exactly, just flushed. You tell yourself it's from moving around, or from the fire, or from stress. Stress can do a lot, right? You list possible harmless explanations like a prayer. It helps, a little. When night comes, sleep refuses to cooperate. Every time you start to drift, a sensation pulls you back. Your heart races, your thoughts spiral. What if this is it? What if tomorrow you're the house with the mark on the door? You imagine the sounds from inside such a house, the whispers, the coughing, the waiting, and force yourself to stop. That way lies panic. There is an ongoing scholarly debate about how quickly people lost hope after symptoms appeared.
Some accounts suggest resignation set in almost immediately. Others describe fierce will to survive. Lying here, you feel both. You want to fight. You also want to rest. Fear and fatigue tug in opposite directions. Sometime before dawn, you doze lightly. Your dreams are fragmented, filled with half-formed images of bells and doors and swelling shadows. When you wake again, the ache is still there, but it hasn't worsened. That feels like a victory, even if you know it might be temporary. Surviving this stage of the Black Plague is about enduring the waiting, the watching, the not knowing. You're learning that the illness doesn't just attack the body, it stalks the mind, turning every sensation into a question mark. For now, you're still here, suspended between health and sickness, measuring time in careful breaths and hoping the balance tips in your favor. You wake to the sound of wood scraping against stone, slow and deliberate. For a moment, you think it's just someone moving furniture. Then you hear voices, low, official sounding, and not at all interested in conversation. When you peer through a narrow crack in the shutters, you see it happening a few doors down. A house is being closed. Not locked exactly, but sealed in spirit, which somehow feels worse. This is the stage where homes stop being shelters and start becoming containers.
One mainstream historical fact is that many towns attempted early forms of quarantine, isolating households where sickness appeared. The idea wasn't universal, and it wasn't consistent, but it existed. You don't know the word quarantine, but you understand the meaning immediately when you see planks nailed across a door and a symbol marked nearby. It's not subtle. It's not meant to be.
The people inside that house don't come out. They won't. Not until someone decides it's safe, or until no one answers anymore. You stand there longer than you should, watching the process, feeling a chill that has nothing to do with the weather. This is what happens when fear becomes policy.
As the day unfolds, the town feels smaller. Streets you once walked freely now carry an invisible boundary. You hesitate before passing certain doors. You calculate distances instinctively, stepping wider around corners, holding your breath without realizing it. You are learning how to live inside a shrinking world.
A quirky tidbit makes its way through whispered conversations. Some households are given food through windows or left on the doorstep, like offerings to a very demanding god. Others receive nothing at all. It depends on who you know, how much influence your family has, and whether the watchers believe you're worth the effort. Community spirit, it turns out, has a complicated pricing structure. You think about your own home, how easily it could become one of those houses, how thin the line is between privacy and isolation. You clean more thoroughly than usual, scrubbing surfaces that have never been scrubbed before. It doesn't make scientific sense, but it makes emotional sense. And right now, that counts for a lot. Historians still argue whether these early quarantines saved lives or simply delayed the spread. Some evidence suggests they helped slow things down. Other accounts suggest they trapped healthy people with the sick, sealing their fate. Standing here, you feel the weight of that uncertainty. Safety measures are only comforting if you trust them. Inside, time behaves strangely. Without visitors, without normal work, hours stretch and blur. You start marking the day by light rather than bells. Morning brightness, afternoon warmth, evening shadows. You sit near the window, listening for sounds of life, footsteps, voices, anything that proves the town hasn't vanished while you weren't looking. You hear coughing from somewhere nearby, not loud but persistent. You don't know who it belongs to, and you decide you don't want to know. Knowing would make it too real. This is another small survival tactic. Selective ignorance. Light joke number 1 here. Turns out ignorance isn't bliss, but it is occasionally functional. Food becomes a quiet obsession. You inventory what you have, what might last, what could be stretched. Bread goes stale. Stew gets thinner. You eat slower, as if that might help. Scholars debate how access to food affected survival during outbreaks, but from your perspective, hunger just adds another layer of worry to an already crowded mind. At night, the town feels watched. Guards or volunteers patrol, making sure no one leaves sealed houses. Their footsteps echo more loudly than they should. You imagine what it would be like to be inside one of those homes, hearing the world continue without you. You wonder if people shout, if anyone listens. There's a strange social shift happening. Being alone is now considered virtuous. Staying home is an act of responsibility. You would laugh at the irony if laughing felt appropriate. Another light joke slips in. Congratulations, you're participating in a medieval stay-at-home order, minus the snacks.
Historians still debate how people emotionally handled isolation during the plague. Some records describe despair and madness. Others show resilience and adaptation. You find yourself somewhere in between. You talk to yourself more. You think more. Sometimes you just sit and breathe, counting each inhale like it's a small accomplishment.
Days pass like this. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just quiet pressure, building slowly. Every knock on a door startles you. Every raised voice makes your heart jump. You're learning that surviving the Black Plague isn't always about fighting illness. It's about enduring confinement without letting fear eat you from the inside. When you finally lie down to sleep, the house feels both safe and fragile. The walls are thin. The silence is heavy. You curl into yourself, not from cold, but from instinct, and hope that when morning comes, your door will still be just a door, and not a boundary between you and the rest of the living world. When the knock finally comes, it's softer than you expected. Not dramatic, not demanding, just a careful tapping, like someone is afraid of what might answer back. You open the door a narrow amount and find a physician standing there, wrapped in layered cloth, smelling strongly of herbs. Behind him, someone carries a small wooden box filled with tools that look more suited for carpentry than healing. This, apparently, is help. One mainstream historical fact is that medieval doctors relied heavily on Galenic medicine and humoral theory, which meant treatments were designed to rebalance the body rather than target a disease. You don't hear those words, of course. What you hear are confident explanations about excesses and deficiencies, spoken with reassuring certainty. Confidence counts for a lot right now. You're invited, politely, cautiously, to describe how you feel. You mention the ache, the warmth, the lingering fatigue. The physician nods gravely, as if you've confirmed a theory he already liked. He peers at your skin, your eyes, your tongue. You feel like a particularly anxious piece of produce at a market stall. The first treatment suggested is bloodletting. It's very popular, almost fashionable. The idea is simple: too much bad stuff in your blood. So let some out. You consider the logic. You consider the sharp instrument. You consider your limited understanding of medicine. Historians still argue whether bloodletting hastened death in plague victims or was merely ineffective. From where you're standing, it mostly looks unpleasant. You agree because refusing feels risky in a different way. A small cut is made. Blood flows. You focus on breathing slowly, telling yourself this is helping, or at least not hurting too much. Light joke number 1 for this section. If this is balance, you'd hate to see imbalance. After that comes advice. Avoid cold air. Avoid hot air. Eat warming foods. Avoid heavy foods. Sleep more. Don't sleep too much. Pray. Don't worry. You nod through all of it, filing the instructions under contradictory but well-intentioned. The physician leaves, smelling like clothes and uncertainty. Later, someone brings you a remedy. It's a thick drink made from crushed herbs, vinegar, and something bitter you don't recognize. A quirky tidbit you've heard before resurfaces. Some cures include ground pearls or even precious metals, because nothing says healing like swallowing jewelry. Thankfully, this one does not. You drink it anyway, because hope is an ingredient too.
Your body reacts in unpredictable ways. You feel lightheaded, then oddly energized, then tired again. It's hard to tell what's the illness, what's the treatment, and what's just stress playing tricks on you. Historians still debate whether any medieval remedies had real effects against the plague. A few herbs may have eased symptoms. Most did nothing. Some probably made things worse. It's a gamble disguised as care. Outside, you hear others discussing cures with near religious fervor. This doctor is better than that one. This remedy saved my cousin's neighbor's friend. That treatment killed 3 people. Information is anecdotal and passionately defended. You keep your opinions to yourself. Arguing feels like wasted energy.
As the day drags on, you rest as instructed. Resting sounds easy until you try it with a mind that won't stop racing. You lie there, staring at the ceiling, cataloging sensations. Is that warmth normal? Is that pulse too fast? You wonder how much of healing is physical and how much is psychological. Scholars still argue how fear and stress affected plague outcomes. You suspect it didn't help.
In the afternoon, another visitor arrives, a religious figure offering prayers. This is also considered treatment. You accept the prayers because refusing them feels rude and possibly dangerous to your soul, which is having its own crisis right now. Faith and medicine overlap heavily here. Sometimes they cooperate, sometimes they compete. Mostly they coexist awkwardly. As evening approaches, you feel marginally better, or maybe just less panicked. It's hard to tell. Improvement is subtle, like a tide changing direction without asking your permission. You cling to it anyway. Even small comfort feels enormous.
There's an odd intimacy in being treated. People touch you carefully. They look at you closely. In normal times, this would be invasive. Now it's one of the few signs that you still belong to the world of the living. Another light joke slides in quietly. Turns out the real luxury is attention, not gold. But it hasn't worsened. That's enough to call the treatments a success, at least for now.
Surviving the Black Plague means accepting help that isn't perfect, trusting people who are guessing, and enduring cures that feel like experiments. You're learning that medicine here isn't about certainty, it's about trying something rather than nothing. And for tonight, that trying has carried you one more day forward. As you grow strong enough to move about again, you notice that the tone of the town has shifted. Not quieter this time, but sharper. Fear has matured into something more pointed. People aren't just worried anymore, they're suspicious. Conversations drop off when someone unfamiliar approaches. Doors close a little faster. Eyes linger a little longer. You can feel it in the air, heavier than the herbs and smoke, the need to blame. One mainstream historical fact is that during the Black Death, communities across Europe searched desperately for explanations, often turning on minority groups or outsiders. You don't see this as a grand historical pattern unfolding. You see it in small moments. A glance held too long. A rumor repeated with more confidence than evidence. Someone muttering that they must be responsible, though no one ever quite defines who they are. Faith intensifies. Churches fill and empty at strange hours. Some people pray constantly, convinced devotion is the only shield left. Others avoid churches entirely, whispering that gathering is dangerous or that priests are just as vulnerable as anyone else. Historians still argue whether religious devotion increased survival or merely provided emotional relief. From where you stand, relief alone feels valuable. You attend services when you can, mostly to listen. Sermons have changed. They're less about guidance and more about interpretation. This plague means something, you're told. Punishment, warning, cleansing. The explanations vary by day. You nod politely, wondering what kind of lesson requires so many bodies to make its point. Light joke number 1 for this section. If this is divine messaging, it could really use clearer phrasing. Outside the church, tempers flare. Someone accuses a neighbor of bringing sickness by bad behavior. Another claims certain people are immune because they live more righteously. You notice how quickly illness becomes a moral scoreboard. If someone survives, they must be good. If they die, well, conclusions are drawn.
A quirky tidbit circulates that some groups believe flagellating themselves, publicly whipping their own backs, will appease God and drive the plague away. You see processions pass through town, chanting and bleeding, convinced pain is the price of salvation. Historians still debate whether these movements offered spiritual comfort or deepened social chaos. Watching them, you mostly feel tired. You've already got enough problems without adding voluntary suffering to the list. Blame doesn't stay abstract for long. It settles on individuals, foreigners, travelers, people who look or worship differently. You hear warnings shouted in the street. Sometimes they escalate into threats. You keep your head down, suddenly aware of how thin the line is between neighbor and enemy. Survival now requires social navigation, not just physical health.
At home, you think about how quickly trust erodes under pressure. Before the plague, disagreements were about land, trade, or gossip. Now they're about existence. Who deserves to live? Who might endanger others? Historians argue whether fear naturally produces scapegoats or whether leadership failure accelerates it. You don't know the answer. You just know it's happening.
You become careful with your words. You agree when agreement feels safer. You stay silent when silence feels wiser. This is not cowardice, you tell yourself. It's strategy. Another light joke slips in. Diplomacy has never been so tightly linked to personal survival.
At night, you hear shouting in the distance. Someone is being accused of hiding sickness. Someone else insists they're fine. The argument blurs into noise, then into nothing. You lie awake, wondering how many of these conflicts end quietly, and how many don't.
There's a strange contradiction forming. People crave explanations, yet reject complexity. Simple answers spread fastest, even when they hurt. You wish you could explain germs, transmission, probability. You can't. So fear fills the gap. And fear is a terrible teacher.
Despite it all, small acts of kindness still happen. Food left anonymously, water shared, a quiet prayer offered without judgment. These moments don't erase the tension, but they soften it. Historians still debate whether communities fractured or strengthened during the plague. You suspect both are true, often at the same time. As you drift towards sleep, you realize surviving the Black Plague isn't just about avoiding illness. It's about avoiding becoming something worse under pressure. Holding on to humanity, even when the world is narrowing, might be one of the hardest challenges of all.
You notice it first in the silence, where work used to be. The steady noises that once defined your days, hammers, looms, carts, shouted prices, have thinned out, like a song losing its rhythm. You walk past workshops with doors half open, tools resting exactly where someone last set them down. Not abandoned exactly, just paused, as if the town itself is holding its breath. One mainstream historical fact is that the Black Death caused a massive labor shortage across Europe. So many people fell ill or died that entire trades struggled to function. You don't see statistics. You see gaps, empty benches, a mill that runs only every few days because no one is strong enough to turn the wheel consistently. Work hasn't disappeared. It's become unreliable, like everything else. For those still able to work, something strange happens. You're suddenly valuable. Not respected necessarily, but needed. A landowner who once ignored you now asks if you can help harvest. Wages creep upward in quiet, almost embarrassed ways. Food, on the other hand, also costs more, so it's not exactly a windfall. Still, it's odd to feel leverage in a world that feels so out of control. Historians still argue whether survivors experienced genuine economic improvement
or if rising prices erased most benefits. From your position, it feels like both. You earn more coins, but each coin feels lighter, less trustworthy. Money itself seems nervous, like it might stop working at any moment. You hear stories of peasants refusing work unless paid better, of workers leaving bad conditions because for once they can. It sounds almost rebellious, almost hopeful. A quirky tidbit circulates that some landlords complain loudly that the world has turned upside down, as if the plague personally offended the social order. You try not to smile at that. Try.
Markets are different now. Fewer stalls, shorter hours, less variety. But the conversations are sharper, more transactional. People bargain harder. Sellers explain shortages with tired honesty. You notice that small luxuries vanish first. Spices, fine cloth. Anything non-essential fades quietly away, leaving behind the basics and a sense of loss you didn't expect to feel over cinnamon. Workdays shorten, not by design, but by necessity. There just aren't enough hands. You find yourself doing tasks you were never trained for, guided by vague instructions and trial and error. Mistakes happen. No one yells. Yelling takes energy, and energy is precious.
There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether this labor shift planted early seeds for the end of feudalism. Did people realize their worth in these moments? Did power quietly rebalance? You don't think in those terms. You just notice that some voices are listened to now that weren't before, including yours, occasionally. Light joke number 1 for this section slides in gently. Turns out it takes a global catastrophe for management to finally appreciate the workforce. A shame, really.
Not everyone benefits. Those too sick to work fall behind quickly. Charity exists, but it's strained. You see people selling heirlooms for bread, trading memories for meals. It's sobering how fast possessions turn into survival tools. You inventory your own things, wondering what you'd give up first if it came to that.
Travel for work becomes rare. Borders tighten. Towns eye newcomers with suspicion. Labor might be needed, but outsiders are still dangerous. This contradiction stalls recovery in odd ways. Jobs exist, but people are afraid to fill them. Historians still debate whether mobility increased or decreased during the plague years. From your view, movement feels risky, but staying feels limiting. At the end of a long, strange day, you count your earnings. It's more than before. You should feel relieved. Instead, you feel cautious. Prosperity born from absence carries a weight. Every opportunity is shaped like someone else's loss.
You realize that surviving the Black Plague isn't just about staying alive. It's about navigating a world where the rules of work, value, and fairness are being rewritten in real time. You adapt because you have to, learning new skills, accepting new terms, and quietly understanding that the old normal isn't coming back. As night settles in, the town is still quieter than it used to be, but there's movement, a hint of adjustment, life bending instead of breaking. You lie down tired, hands sore, mind busy, and think that if survival has a sound, maybe it's this: uneven, uncertain, but still going.
The morning greets you with an eerie calm. The streets are emptier than usual, but not silent. From a distance, you hear the faint clatter of carts carrying goods, grain, firewood, whatever can be spared, and voices calling across alleys, muffled by fear and caution. The world outside your door feels both familiar and alien, as if time itself has slowed just to watch you react.
You step out, careful with every footfall, aware that the line between safe and dangerous has grown thinner than a cobweb. You notice how rumors travel faster than goods. The market, once the center of news, now functions partly as a rumor mill. Someone swears a neighbor has succumbed. Another insists a visiting merchant is infected. You can't verify anything, and that uncertainty gnaws at you. Historians still argue whether panic accelerated the spread of the Black Death,
or merely amplified social disruption. From where you stand, the effect is obvious. Fear spreads faster than the plague itself. Travel, once a routine for merchants and workers, has almost stopped. Roads that were busy with trade are now ghostly lanes. You see abandoned wagons, sometimes overturned, with signs warning travelers away. One quirky tidbit you hear is that some people tie bells to their doors to ward off evil, thinking the sound alone can keep the disease away. You briefly wonder if they imagine the plague has ears and a taste for irony.
Despite all this, people still need to get by. Those who remain healthy, like you, cautiously, take on extra work. Farmers go from field to field, paying more attention to hygiene and proximity than they ever have before. Shopkeepers open only for a few hours, stocking less but charging more for what's available. The economy is fragile, patched together by the hands of the living, while the dead accumulate quietly around them. It's odd to feel busy in a world that feels like it's falling apart, but activity brings a strange reassurance. You find yourself counting your own steps, habits, and movements. How close to a neighbor do you pass? How often do you touch a surface? These calculations, once foreign, are now instinctive. Survival isn't just about avoiding illness. It's about managing behavior in ways that feel obsessive yet necessary. Light joke number 1 for this section. Congratulations! You've invented social distancing centuries early. No badge required. Conversations are clipped. People speak cautiously, afraid that a single cough or gesture might cause offense, or worse. Faith remains central. Priests and nuns offer guidance, blessings, and sometimes herbal remedies. You attend some sessions, mostly to observe. You hear sermons about divine justice, about repentance, about the fleeting nature of life. They make sense, and yet feel entirely abstract in the shadow of the streets outside. Scholars still debate whether religious instruction offered comfort, fear, or both during the plague. From your vantage, it's a mixture you can't fully untangle. Homes are quieter. Some remain sealed, others open cautiously, their occupants wary of visitors. You notice the rituals people adopt: washing hands more often, burning herbs, sprinkling vinegar, adjusting diet. Some practices make sense in hindsight. Others, like wearing masks stuffed with flowers or pearls, are charmingly futile. Yet in the quiet moments, you realize that ritual itself, whatever its effectiveness, is a kind of protection, a mental shield against the chaos. Even the act of moving around the town requires consideration. You walk carefully, avoiding unnecessary contact, observing the subtle signs that someone might be ill. A neighbor coughs. You cross the street. Someone lowers their eyes when you pass. You nod briefly, keeping distance. Fear is now woven into etiquette, and etiquette is now survival. Historians still argue whether conscious avoidance actually slowed infection rates or simply created social isolation. For you, the distinction doesn't matter. Safety feels immediate, practical, necessary. Food scarcity is another constant undercurrent. You notice bakeries rationing bread. Markets stock less produce. Prices fluctuate unpredictably. You eat carefully, thinking about longevity more than flavor. You're aware that surviving isn't just about dodging illness. It's about balancing energy, warmth, and nourishment in a way that keeps your body resilient. Every meal becomes a small victory. By afternoon, the streets begin to feel less threatening. Not because the plague is gone, but because patterns emerge. You start recognizing which houses are safe to pass, which routes keep you mostly isolated, and which neighbors are observing rules versus ignoring them. Knowledge becomes a currency as valuable as coin. A quirky tidbit circulates that some families mark doors with chalk symbols, indicating their health status, a primitive code of conduct. You smile quietly, noting that human ingenuity thrives even in crisis. Evening brings shadows stretching long across the town. Bells toll in the distance, their sound heavier than usual, like the town itself is sighing.
You walk home slowly, reflecting on the rhythm of survival. Every cautious step, every measured breath, every decision about contact or food is part of an invisible pattern that keeps you alive.
Historians still debate how ordinary people experienced the everyday reality of the plague. But from your perspective, it's a full-time occupation just to remain cautious without becoming paralyzed by fear.
Night falls, and your house is quiet. You eat a modest supper, clean what little you can, and prepare for rest. Your body is tired, but alert. Your mind is wary, but aware. Survival, you realize, is not a single event. It is the accumulation of small, careful choices, repeated endlessly, until they become instinct.
And though the world feels diminished, confined, and unpredictable, you recognize that each day you endure is a subtle triumph, a quiet defiance against an invisible enemy that respects no rules, only opportunity. As you settle into bed, you listen to the town breathing around you, faintly alive. You close your eyes, feeling the tension in your shoulders, letting it soften just a little. Another day has passed. You are still here. You are still learning. And that, strangely enough, is a reason to hold on to hope, even in the thick, unrelenting shadow of the plague.
The morning greets you with the familiar chill of the early hours, a quiet that almost feels deliberate, as if the world is holding its breath again. You stretch, noticing how tense your muscles have become from weeks of careful movements, cautious glances, and constant calculation. Living during the plague has transformed ordinary routines into acts of vigilance. Every step you take, every breath you draw, is measured against invisible risk, and you feel the weight of it pressing gently into your chest.
You step outside, and the town is waking slowly. Fewer people, fewer carts, fewer voices. Even the birds seem quieter, the air heavier. You notice the smell first: burning herbs, vinegar, smoke from a distant fire, and beneath it all, a subtle, unplaceable odor that prickles the back of your throat. This is the world in which you now live, familiar yet skewed, ordinary yet strange. One mainstream historical fact is that fear of contagion fundamentally altered everyday life, from market traffic to religious gatherings, and you feel that shift in every interaction.
Neighbors cross the street rather than nod from a distance. Children's laughter, once a constant background hum, is muted or absent. You pass a shop where the baker's son once ran errands. Now the windows are shuttered, and the small footprints of a previous era, the signs of children playing, of normal life, feel like ghosts. Historians still argue how much social life changed permanently versus temporarily, but for you, the transformation feels total. The world has shrunk to the radius of what is observable, navigable, and safe. By mid-morning, you find yourself thinking about work. Those who remain healthy are stretched thin. Fields go untended. Workshops run with skeleton crews. You step in to help where you can, though each task feels weighted with caution. Touching tools, moving objects, interacting with others, all of it now requires a mental checklist of safety. You feel a strange pride in managing this. Survival has become a discipline. A quirky tidbit drifts into your consciousness as you walk past the market. Some towns experimented with health marks to denote households that were clean, infected, or quarantined. Chalk symbols on doors, colored ribbons, even notes tucked into windows. These methods feel rudimentary, almost whimsical, but in practice they guide decisions. You find yourself silently admiring human creativity, even under duress, while wondering if any of it actually slows the disease. By afternoon, the strain of isolation, observation, and careful movement begins to press harder. You notice how survival now relies on more than health. It relies on social intelligence. How far can you go? How close can you get? Which paths are safer?
who is trustworthy. Scholars still debate whether knowledge of contagion was sufficient to prevent spread, or whether intuition and local rules were the primary tools of survival. You suspect it's the latter. Light joke number 1 drifts in. Congratulations, your neighborhood has become a medieval board game, and every move could cost you a turn, or worse. You step lightly along a familiar street, counting steps, avoiding certain doors, pausing only when necessary. Awareness is exhausting, but it's also the thing that keeps you alive. Food continues to be a careful negotiation. Bakers ration, sellers hoard, and those with more influence claim what remains. You carefully measure meals, eating slowly, deliberately, balancing nourishment against scarcity. Hunger is a subtle companion, whispering in the background, yet also reminding you to be grateful for what you have. It's strange how the absence of abundance sharpens the awareness of survival.
As evening approaches, the town seems to contract further. The sun casts long shadows that stretch like fingers across empty streets. Bells toll, marking time more anxiously than usual. You hear coughing, faint but persistent, and flinch. Each sound is now loaded with meaning, a reminder that the plague can appear anywhere. Suspicion and caution shape every interaction. You notice patterns. Certain houses are avoided, certain paths taken more than others, rituals followed meticulously. You rely on observation as much as instinct.
Returning home, you pause to reflect. The day has passed without disaster, yet the underlying tension remains. You have adapted, adjusted, and survived, but you are aware that nothing guarantees the next sunrise. Living through this stage of the plague is an endurance test for both body and mind. You understand that caution alone isn't enough. Psychological resilience, keeping fear in check while remaining vigilant, is just as critical.
By nightfall, you prepare for rest. Your house is quiet, your body tired, your mind alert. Survival has become a series of repeated patterns: vigilance, caution, adaptation, observation. You lie down, feeling the gentle weight of the day lifting slowly from your shoulders. The plague has changed the rhythm of your existence, but you have found a way to move within it, carefully, thoughtfully, persistently.
The day begins with a muted gray light, filtered through clouds that seem to linger longer than usual, casting the town in a somber haze. You stretch slowly, aware of the rhythm your body has adapted to over weeks of cautious movement and careful observation. Your muscles ache in places you didn't know existed, and yet there's a quiet satisfaction in their endurance. Living through the Black Plague has transformed ordinary actions, rising, walking, eating, into deliberate, almost ceremonial acts of survival. You step outside and immediately sense how much the social landscape has shifted. Streets that once buzzed with activity now feel like corridors of caution. People move in small groups, faces wary, gestures minimized. The usual greetings, a wave, a nod, a brief exchange of words, are replaced by distant acknowledgments, careful not to breach the invisible radius of personal safety. One mainstream historical fact is that the plague forced communities to enforce social distancing of a kind, long before anyone had a word for it. You feel it in every footfall and every glance. The marketplace offers a strange mix of continuity and disruption. Familiar vendors are present, but fewer of them. Stalls are more orderly, more spaced out, as if the plague itself has imposed a new etiquette. You notice prices fluctuating oddly, goods appearing and disappearing unpredictably. Wheat, butter, firewood, staples remain scarce. Luxuries vanish almost entirely. Historians still debate how the economic consequences of the plague played out, with some arguing that labor shortages benefited survivors, while others emphasize increased inequality and suffering. Walking among the stalls, you sense both truths simultaneously. You pause to observe a neighbor, busy sweeping the front of his shop with a meticulous attention that wasn't necessary before. Quirky tidbit: some people believed that thorough cleaning of one's home could physically repel the plague, often using vinegar, herbs, and sometimes ashes. You smirk quietly at the thought, imagining the disease rolling its eyes at all the effort. But the neighbor seems earnest, and earnestness carries weight these days.
Movement requires constant calculation. You measure your steps carefully, avoid lingering near crowds, and adjust your path based on where people are gathering. Every cough-like sound sends your awareness snapping to full attention. Survival has become a game of observation and anticipation. Light joke number 1. Congratulations, you are now a medieval traffic sensor for germs, and nobody asked for the promotion.
At midday, you see another familiar sign of adaptation. Laborers working in pairs or small teams, performing multiple tasks, covering for neighbors who are too ill or too wary to leave their homes. Work has not disappeared. It has shifted, fragmented, and become more intense for those still capable. You step into your own tasks with care, focusing on repetitive motions to anchor your mind amid uncertainty. Historians still argue whether these changes accelerated shifts in social mobility, giving some peasants and laborers newfound leverage over previously rigid hierarchies. You sense that small hints of change are in the air, though survival consumes more immediate attention than theory. Food remains a constant preoccupation. You ration, measuring carefully, savoring each bite more than before. Meals have become not only sustenance, but also a comforting ritual, a way to impose some order on a world that refuses consistency. Supplies are patchy, yet you find that being careful stretches them further than you expected. Every meal is both a practical necessity and a quiet victory.
By mid-afternoon, rumors circulate in hushed tones about another nearby town succumbing to the plague. Stories of neighbors, friends, and distant relatives affected by illness make the invisible threat feel tangible. You listen politely, but avoid panic. Emotional endurance is part of survival now.
There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how accurate contemporary accounts were, but from your perspective, whether the stories are fully true or exaggerated doesn't matter. Fear itself is contagious.
You notice subtle social shifts in your own interactions. Some neighbors avoid contact altogether, while others attempt to maintain connections, trading small favors like bread, firewood, or advice. Trust is a currency that fluctuates wildly with circumstance, and you handle it cautiously. You nod, exchange information, and retreat to personal space with precision.
Quirky tidbit: some towns developed informal watchers, individuals tasked with monitoring households for illness and compliance with local health rules. You realize that human observation is now as crucial as any treatment or remedy. As evening falls, you return home, your thoughts circling the balance between caution and fatigue. Every day requires vigilance, yet endless vigilance wears on the mind. You notice how much smaller the world feels now, the radius of safety, the range of trusted spaces, the limits of where you can go without risk. Light joke number 2. Congratulations again. Your universe has shrunk to a radius slightly larger than your front yard. You sit quietly, reflecting on the transformations wrought by weeks of careful observation, modified routines, and cautious interactions. Living through the Black Plague isn't simply about avoiding illness. It is about adapting to a society that has reshaped itself in response to fear, scarcity, and survival instinct. You marvel quietly at human adaptability, even under the most oppressive circumstances.
Night settles in with an almost oppressive stillness. You eat a modest supper, wash your hands, and prepare for sleep. The world feels both heavier and more intimate. You are alone with your thoughts, aware of your vulnerabilities, and grateful for the small things that remain within your control. A warm room, enough food,
and the knowledge that you have navigated another day without catastrophe.
Lying in bed, you realize that survival is now a delicate choreography of observation, restraint, and endurance. Every day is a rehearsal for the next, and every precaution you take is a small affirmation of life. Even amid uncertainty, the rhythm of persistence, the repeated acts of attention, adaptation, and careful movement offers a quiet form of hope. You wake to the soft glow of dawn seeping through the shutters, a muted reminder that the world outside still exists, even if it feels smaller, slower, and more fragile than before. The town is quiet, the usual clatter replaced by a faint rhythm of cautious movement. Someone sweeping, a cart rolling slowly along a side street, the occasional cough echoing like a warning. Living through the Black Plague has turned the mundane into a constant exercise in attention. Every sound, smell, and movement is a potential signal, and your mind has become finely tuned to read them.
Stepping outside, you notice the streets have grown more regimented. Neighbors move with deliberate spacing. Children, when they appear, are watched closely, their laughter now subdued, measured to avoid drawing attention. One mainstream historical fact is that communities implemented rudimentary public health measures, from cordoning off infected houses to restricting gatherings, long before germ theory existed. You feel this regulation as an invisible hand guiding your path, shaping your steps and interactions. The market is alive in the same quiet, cautious way it has been for weeks. Vendors call out softly, and buyers respond in clipped tones. Scarcity has made every transaction deliberate. You notice prices shift unpredictably, influenced by availability, fear, and rumors. Historians still argue about the economic consequences of the Black Death, whether it created long-term opportunity for survivors or entrenched suffering and inequality. Walking through the market, you experience both realities: the empowerment of being able to negotiate in a labor-short world, and the stress of seeing desperation etched into every face. You pause to observe a neighbor who was taken to burning herbs outside her door, muttering prayers as smoke curls into the air. Quirky tidbit: some believed aromatic smoke could cleanse the air of disease. You wonder if it's the scent or the ritual that comforts her. Perhaps both. You focus on small acts like these, internalizing the notion that survival is as much about psychological sustenance as physical safety. Labor continues to shift in ways that surprise you. Fields are tended in rotation, workshops staffed in shifts, and certain trades operate only intermittently, dictated by who is healthy enough to work. You participate where needed, careful, deliberate, aware that every touch and movement carries both risk and necessity. Light joke number 1. Congratulations, your workday has become a combination of obstacle course and mindfulness exercise. You adapt because you must, and adaptation has become second nature.
Rumors drift through town, carried by whispers and cautious gestures. Another household is sick. A traveler returned from a neighboring region. Someone survived an illness and is now considered fortunate or even blessed. You notice how information flows faster than goods, shaping decisions about where to go, whom to trust, and what precautions to take. Scholars still debate the accuracy and impact of contemporary reports on behavior, but from your perspective, rumor is as powerful as any law.
You spend time reflecting on social dynamics. Suspicion lingers everywhere. People look for signs of illness, signs of impropriety, signs of negligence. You nod politely, smile where necessary, but keep your distance. Survival now depends as much on navigating social perception as avoiding contagion. Quirky tidbit: some towns employed watchers to monitor quarantined households, both for compliance and to reassure the rest of the community. You realize these roles, awkward as they are, contribute to a fragile equilibrium.
Food is still a careful concern. Bread and cheese, whatever vegetables are available, measured meticulously. Scarcity and caution shape every meal. You savor each bite with awareness, understanding that nourishment is not merely biological, it is a psychological anchor in a world that feels constantly on edge. Historians still argue how access to resources influenced mortality rates, but you don't need statistics. Hunger and rationing are immediate, tangible pressures. By afternoon, you notice the subtle patterns that signal safety. Paths that remain mostly empty, houses where doors are cautiously open, neighbors who maintain the right balance of visibility and discretion. Survival has become a game of observation. Every step is calculated. Light joke number 2. Congratulations, you've become a medieval urban planner for germs, and nobody asked for the job. Yet these measures, small and careful, feel protective.
Evening arrives with shadows stretching across the streets. Bells toll softly, a reminder of the passing hours. You walk home slowly, reflecting on the rhythm of survival, vigilance, observation, adaptation, endurance. Each day is structured by small acts of caution, each choice a reinforcement of life in an unpredictable world. Quirky tidbit. Some families mark doors with chalk symbols indicating the household's health status, a practice blending caution and communication. You note the ingenuity and resilience hidden in these simple signs.
Back home, you clean your space, prepare a modest meal, and settle in. The quiet allows your mind to drift, but it doesn't escape entirely from vigilance. You hear faint coughing in the distance and flinch instinctively, a reflex shaped by weeks of living under constant threat. Nightfall reinforces the reality. Survival is not a single achievement, but a series of careful, repeated choices. As you lie down, you reflect on the cumulative weight of the weeks behind you. Fatigue, vigilance, fear, adaptation, and observation all intermingle. Living through the Black Plague has reshaped your sense of normalcy. The town may appear unchanged at first glance, but the rhythm of life, the social patterns, and the very texture of existence have been altered. You close your eyes, feeling the quiet tension in your shoulders soften slightly, acknowledging that while the world is different, so too are you, and that adaptation is itself a form of resilience.
The morning arrives with a soft gray light filtering through the shutters, painting your room in gentle shades of silver and charcoal. You stretch carefully, feeling the residual tension in your muscles from days of heightened awareness, cautious movement, and measured breaths. Living through the Black Plague has transformed even the most ordinary motions into deliberate acts. Rising, walking, eating, breathing, all require mindfulness, a constant negotiation between instinct and fear. Stepping outside, the town greets you with a quiet you've come to recognize as both protective and unnerving. Streets are sparse, with movement cautious and deliberate. You note familiar faces appearing briefly at windows or along alleyways, nodding without words, maintaining safe distances. One mainstream historical fact is that communities implemented social rules to limit interaction, effectively reducing contagion.
You sense these invisible boundaries in every glance, every gesture, and every choice of route you take.
At the market, the atmosphere is tense, yet oddly functional. Sellers call softly, buyers respond with brief acknowledgments. Scarcity shapes every transaction, and the balance of supply and demand feels precarious. You notice that staples, bread, grains, preserved meats, are in demand, while luxuries have vanished. Prices fluctuate in unpredictable ways, a reminder that the social and economic world has become as fragile as human health.
Historians still debate whether survivors benefited economically from labor shortages, or if the instability simply reshuffled hardship. You experienced both realities, small opportunities, shadowed by ongoing risk. You paused by a neighbor's doorway, watching them perform their daily rituals. Quirky tidbit, some households sprinkle vinegar or hang bundles of herbs to cleanse the air and protect against disease.
You marvel at the creativity and determination involved, even if the effectiveness is questionable. Human adaptability, you realize, is as much about ritual and routine as it is about any practical outcome. These small acts provide comfort, a sense of control, and reassurance that survival is not entirely random.
By midday, the strain of constant observation and social vigilance begins to weigh on you. You measure your steps, avoid lingering near crowds, and monitor every cough, every gesture, every change in demeanor. Survival has become a delicate balance between engagement and avoidance. Light joke number 1. Congratulations, you are now a full-time social analyst and urban navigator specializing in medieval risk assessment.
Your mind has expanded to track patterns, assess threats, and make split-second judgments, all while your body navigates the same old streets. Labor continues to adapt in subtle ways. Fields are tended in rotation, workshops operate on minimal crews, and small-scale trade continues cautiously. You participate where necessary, mindful of both efficiency and exposure. Historians still argue whether these labor adjustments contributed to long-term societal change, with some suggesting early shifts in social mobility. You notice the subtle empowerment of those still able to work, but it's tempered by the constant presence of illness and scarcity.
Rumors circulate quietly but persistently. Another household is infected. Someone has survived illness. You hear reports of distant towns succumbing to the plague. Information flows faster than goods, shaping choices and influencing caution. Quirky tidbit: some families mark their doors with chalk to communicate their household status, creating a primitive but effective system of information sharing.
You rely on these markers as much as on your own instincts, recognizing that observation is as critical as any precaution. Food remains an ongoing preoccupation. Rationing is strict. Each meal is measured carefully, balancing nutrition, energy, and scarcity. You savor each bite, aware that sustenance is not only physical but psychological, a small anchor in a world that feels increasingly unpredictable. Scholars still debate how access to food influences survival rates, but from your perspective, careful planning is more immediate than analysis. By late afternoon, subtle patterns of movement and safety emerge. Certain routes are reliably clear, while others are unpredictable. Houses with open doors are signals, silent but informative. You navigate with heightened awareness, blending instinct with observation. Light joke number 2. Congratulations again. You are a medieval cartographer, mapping invisible hazards and plotting safe passage through streets that were once familiar.
Evening settles over the town, stretching shadows across quiet streets. Bells toll softly, marking the passage of time with a weight that feels different from ordinary days. You walk home slowly, reflecting on the rhythm of survival. Observation, adaptation, restraint, and endurance. Every small action, a measured step, a polite nod, a choice about what to eat or where to go, is part of a delicate choreography that keeps you alive. Returning home, you perform evening rituals, cleaning, preparing a modest meal, washing hands meticulously. Each action is small, deliberate, and vital. The quiet allows you to reflect on the cumulative weight of days, weeks, perhaps months, spent navigating a world transformed by fear, scarcity, and vigilance. The town may appear unchanged to a casual observer, but the rhythm of life, the texture of social interaction, and the pattern of daily survival have been fundamentally altered.
As you lie down to rest, fatigue presses gently against your body, and yet your mind remains alert. Survival has become a series of repeated patterns, each one reinforcing endurance. Living through the Black Plague is not simply about avoiding sickness. It is about navigating a society reshaped by collective trauma, scarcity, and fear.
And tonight, as you close your eyes, You carry with you the quiet knowledge that each day survived is a small, steady triumph, a testament to resilience in the face of uncertainty. Dawn arrives slow and muted, the sky painted in soft, uncertain shades of gray. You rise carefully, muscles still stiff from the weeks of vigilant walking, careful avoidance, and constant mental calculations. Each step, each breath is measured. Survival has become a series of small, deliberate acts, almost ritualistic in their repetition. The world outside your door is both familiar and alien, reshaped by fear, absence, and cautious human adaptation. You step into the streets and immediately notice how much has changed in the collective rhythm of the town. Streets that were once busy with merchants, children, and travelers now move like a quiet stream, few, deliberate, and highly monitored. Social interaction has shifted from spontaneous greetings to deliberate gestures, each nod or wave carefully weighted to avoid unnecessary exposure. One mainstream historical fact is that medieval communities developed early public health regulations, ranging from quarantined households to restricted gatherings, designed to limit contagion. You feel the invisible influence of these rules in every cautious step you take.
At the market, there is a quiet intensity. Sellers call softly, buyers respond with careful attention. Staples are in short supply, luxuries nearly gone, and prices fluctuate in unpredictable patterns. You see neighbors bargaining politely but firmly, weighing scarcity and forced inequalities. From your perspective, you experience both the empowerment of negotiating leverage and the constant pressure of scarcity. You notice your neighbor's survival rituals, small and meticulous. Quirky tidbit: some families hang bundles of herbs in doorways or burn aromatic substances inside homes, believing that scent and smoke could ward off disease. You smile quietly, understanding that ritual serves as much a psychological function as any actual protective one. The effort itself is an act of resilience, a small claim to agency in a world dominated by uncertainty.
Labor continues to be irregular. Fields and workshops operate on minimal crews, adjusted according to who is healthy enough to work. You step into your assigned tasks with caution and focus, aware that any contact or misstep could carry consequences. Light joke number 1. Congratulations. Your workday has become a precision exercise in survival, where efficiency meets germ diplomacy. These adjustments have reshaped social hierarchies subtly, giving certain laborers more leverage than they ever had before. Scholars still debate how much these labor shifts contributed to long-term societal change, but for now, survival requires flexibility, attentiveness, and endurance.
Rumors travel fast in hushed tones. Another household is affected. Someone has recovered against the odds. You hear about distant towns suffering new outbreaks. Information spreads quicker than food or coins, shaping choices about movement, social interaction, and trust. Quirky tidbit: some families mark doors with chalk or cloth symbols to indicate health status, creating a primitive but effective system of communication. You pay careful attention to these markers, recognizing them as critical cues in an environment where visibility and vigilance are survival tools.
Food and sustenance remain a constant concern. Rationing is strict, and every meal is measured for both quantity and nutritional value. You eat slowly, savoring flavors in a way that feels almost ritualistic. Survival is as much about careful planning and conserving energy. Enough calories, enough hydration, enough warmth to endure another day.
As afternoon arrives, subtle patterns of safety emerge. Certain streets are more reliable than others. Some neighbors' homes seem safer to approach, while others are best avoided. Survival has become a combination of observation, pattern recognition, and instinct. Light joke number 2. Congratulations, you're now a medieval urban strategist, charting invisible lines of risk and safety with no formal training. The work is exhausting but necessary,
and each successful day reinforces your growing confidence and skill.
Evening brings a quiet that is both comforting and heavy. Shadows stretch across familiar streets, the soundscape muted but punctuated by occasional coughs or distant conversations. Bells toll in the distance, marking time with a weight unusual for ordinary days. You walk home slowly, reflecting on the rhythm of survival, vigilance, observation, adaptation, and endurance. Every small decision, a step, a nod, a rationed meal, is a delicate act of perseverance.
Back home, you perform your evening routines, cleaning surfaces, preparing a modest supper, and washing hands carefully. These small rituals, repetitive and deliberate, provide a sense of control amid uncertainty. Quirky tidbit, some households hang small charms or tokens above doorways to protect occupants, blending superstition, hope, and habit. These symbols, however whimsical, offer reassurance, and in a world dominated by fear, reassurance is survival.
As you settle into bed, you feel the accumulated weight of countless days passed under scrutiny, vigilance, and cautious adaptation. You reflect on how living through the Black Plague has reshaped the ordinary. Work, food, social interaction, and even movement itself. You close your eyes, feeling fatigue press against your body, yet your mind remains alert, processing patterns, memories, and lessons learned. Survival is no longer a simple act of avoiding illness. It is a careful orchestration of endurance, awareness, and resilience, quietly affirming life in the shadow of relentless uncertainty. The morning light filters in, soft and pale, dust motes dancing lazily in the beams, and you feel the rhythm of your body slowly sinking to the day. Weeks of cautious survival, careful observation, and deliberate action have shaped you. Every movement, every choice, every small act has become part of a continuous, mindful practice. Living through the Black Plague has transformed the ordinary into a structured series of survival strategies, and yet somehow, amid the tension, you have adapted. You rise, stretch, and feel the strange, quiet pride of having endured. Stepping outside, the town hums with the faintest energy, subdued but persistent. Streets are still sparse, movement cautious, interactions deliberate. You notice the way people carry themselves differently now. Gestures minimized, greetings measured, eyes alert for subtle signs of illness. One mainstream historical fact is that medieval communities instituted rules for quarantine, sanitation, and movement, often enforced locally.
You see these guidelines in action in every cautious step and measured nod. Social order now intertwines with survival, and you move through it aware of every nuance. The marketplace is alive in the most minimal sense. Vendors call softly, buyers respond with clipped phrases. Supplies are limited, luxuries gone, and pricing fluctuates unpredictably. Historians still argue whether these economic disruptions ultimately favored laborers and survivors or entrenched inequality. But you feel both realities, opportunities and scarcity, and the constant pressure of unpredictability.
Quirky tidbit. Some sellers mark goods with symbols indicating whether the household is infected or not, a rudimentary but practical code to communicate risk. You take note of these cues as silently essential, a tool for navigating a precarious environment. Labor is a careful balancing act. Fields are tended in rotation, workshops operate minimally, and the tasks you perform are deliberate and measured. You notice how roles have subtly shifted. Those who remain healthy wield new influence, not through ambition, but through necessity. Light joke number 1. Congratulations, you are suddenly indispensable, and no one asked for this promotion. Scholars still debate whether these shifts contributed to long-term social change, giving some laborers more leverage over formerly rigid hierarchies. For you, it's practical.
Survival requires adapting to the new rules of labor and social exchange. Rumors, as always, spread faster than the plague itself. Another household is affected. Someone has recovered unexpectedly. Distant towns have fallen into illness. These stories shape your choices, paths you take, interactions you allow, precautions you maintain. Quirky tidbit: some families use chalk symbols to mark household health status, creating a visible guide for social navigation. You rely on these subtle markers, combining observation and intuition to avoid unnecessary risk. Food continues to be rationed, measured carefully, eaten slowly. Each meal is both sustenance and ritual, grounding you in the present amid uncertainty. Survival is as much about conserving energy and maintaining psychological equilibrium as it is about avoiding sickness. Scholars still debate how nutrition and resource access influenced outcomes, but for you, these are immediate, practical concerns. Every small victory, a meal eaten, a chore completed, a safe interaction, feels significant.
By mid-afternoon, the town seems to shrink and expand with patterns of safety. Certain routes feel predictably safe, others less so. Survival has become a continuous exercise in attention, anticipation, and judgment. Light joke number 2. Congratulations again. You are now a medieval urban strategist with no formal training. Observation, pattern recognition, and quick thinking have become as vital as physical health.
Evening descends gently, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. Bells toll, marking time with a somber rhythm. You walk home slowly, reflecting on the rhythm of survival. Vigilance, adaptation, restraint, endurance. Every small decision, a careful step, a rationed meal, a nod to a neighbor, carries meaning. Quirky tidbit: some households leave small tokens or messages outside doors for neighbors, blending caution, kindness, and human ingenuity.
These acts of connection, however small, become quietly profound amid the pervasive fear. Back home, you perform your evening rituals: cleaning, preparing a modest supper, washing hands meticulously. These routines, repetitive and deliberate, provide structure and reassurance. You notice how habits have replaced certainty, offering a sense of control over a world otherwise dominated by chance and disease. Nightfall settles around you, heavy but softened by the quiet rhythms you have built.
Now comes the wind down. You slow your breathing. Thoughts drift gently. The world outside still hums with tension, yet inside your space there is calm. You remind yourself that survival is cumulative, a series of small acts repeated day after day. Fatigue presses softly against your muscles, and you let it ease your mind. Outside noises, the faint cough, the distant bell, the soft creak of the house, become part of a lullaby.
You visualize safe streets, warm meals, and small acts of care that have carried you this far. The days of vigilance blend into a slower cadence, your heartbeat settling into a pattern that whispers of resilience, adaptation, and quiet endurance. You drift further, aware of your presence, of your persistence, of your ability to navigate uncertainty with care. The shadows of the plague remain distant echoes, no longer sharp threats, as the world softens around you.
Sleep comes gently, carrying with it the peace of a small, hard-earned survival. End of script. Sweet dreams.